Fujifilm X-T5 versus the Nikon Zf. Final verdict. Let me start this video off by saying that I think both the X-T5 and the Nikon Zf are phenomenal cameras that produce phenomenal results. If someone gives you either of these cameras for Christmas, thank them, thank the heavens that you got such an amazing camera, and that should be about it. But that's not what we're here for. Let's split some hairs. In a nutshell, the Fuji X-T5 is smaller, more compact, has a joystick on the back of it, has push-in command dials, which make manual focusing much easier. It's probably the best manual focusing implementation I've ever seen. Plus, it has two regular SD card slots, and it has what I would say a flippy screen, the best implementation of a flippy screen for photographic applications. I would also say the X-T5 actually has slightly better image quality than the Zf. Between the increased megapixels and all the film simulations and in-camera customizations, you can get some pretty amazing images, even in somewhat low light. However, the X-T5 is still an APS-C camera. It's not a full-frame camera. You have all the issues with an APS-C sensor. First, just the size of the sensor, right? The depth of field and field of view thing between different sensor sizes, where a 23mm lens is like a 35mm lens, sort of, on a full-frame camera in terms of field of view, but then the depth of field and sort of just even the roundness and 3D-ness of the lens might be different just based on the different sensor size. And yes, can you correct that and step back? Yes, you can, but it's a pain. And, you know, especially with wide lenses, that is a law of diminishing returns. So if you're not familiar with this issue, you know, one, it's talked about more in the context of medium format cameras versus full frame cameras, but the same thing applies between full frame cameras and APS-C cameras. So if none of this makes sense, or if you're not sure about what I'm talking about, let me know in the comments below and I'll make a video about that. Second, low light performance is just not going to be as good as a full frame sensor. It's just not. You know, up until, let's say, 6400 ISO, maybe 12,800 ISO, you're going to get very good results with this just fine. For me, that's more than plenty. And like I said, in some cases, the image quality might be better than some full frame cameras, especially with a lower megapixel count. And in fact, in even some somewhat low light situations, I felt like I actually got some cleaner images than I did out of the Nikon Zf. A bit of a wash on that point, but you should be aware of the differences between the APS-C and full frame cameras. Now the Nikon Zf, man, this camera is so close to being, you know, the camera of the year, as it were. But, you know, no front grip, very heavy, much heavier than a Leica all brass camera, as heavy as many full frame, full featured mirrorless cameras. Like I believe it's maybe even heavier or the same weight as the A7R5. I can put the weights on the screen here, but just kind of way too heavy for a camera of this kind. Like while the ZFC was too cheap and plasticky, they needed to skew a little more compact and a little bit lighter, like the ZFC in my opinion. To wit, I mean, just look at the size difference. I don't have a Nikon film camera here, but just look at that. That's like almost an inch difference in length. It's, you know, a bit higher, taller. I know Nikon cameras are more like this. The old film cameras are more like this, so quite a bit taller. But it's really the weight combined with the larger size, combined with the lack of grip, that makes me think you're really not going to be able to walk around all day carrying the camera like this. You're going to drop it or your wrist's going to give out. I will say the X-T5 I took on a few street photography trips and I didn't find the ergonomics great, but considerably better than this one. This camera also doesn't have a joystick, which is kind of a bummer, but it does have a flippy screen. I don't like where the notch is. It makes it hard to open, but you're going to be able to film yourself with this camera, whereas with the X-T5, you're not going to be able to do that without a monitor attached. I think the dials feel a little bit better on this camera. I don't mind the passive implementation where the dials really only get used in manual mode and they're just, you know, vestigial in any other mode. They don't do anything in any other mode. I think when you're using the camera either way, once you get into using the camera over and over again, you'll get used to it. I prefer the Fuji way of doing it slightly, but not a deal breaker by any means. I am admittedly more familiar with the Fuji menus. I'm more used to them. I think they're both pretty bad, but the Nikon menu system might be the worst of all major manufacturers now that Sony has sort of fixed up their menu a little bit. So that's something that really frustrated me. Like, for example, there's no button on the camera to change auto ISO on and off. I think you might be able to map it to a custom menu, which then potentially could be mapped to a button, maybe this record button, but that's a lot of steps just to go in and out of auto ISO, which is sort of an important feature in my mind. So just things like that just drove me nuts with this camera. I think if you're a Nikon shooter and you're used to it, it'll vex you less. But for me, that was like almost another sort of deal breaker point, along with the weight and ergonomics of this camera. Neither camera has a sensor shield or a shutter that comes down to protect the sensor. I think that's nuts. The Fuji has highlight blink alerts in live view, which is incredible. I can't believe this, but the Nikon doesn't. Many other camera manufacturers don't. Only Leica and Fujifilm have this. How is that possible? That's crazy. I did get this small rig grip for both cameras. These are really great grips. They don't make up for the lack of a grip on both camera as if it were a Nikon Z6, which I think is one of the best grips, on the market, most ergonomically pleasing grips. But it does add a lot. They make it super easy to get on. There's a little handle on the screws, so you don't need a tool to do it. Both have 1/4-20 holes for tripods here, and I think that the ZF one is actually an Arca Swiss compatible plate here, but I'm pretty sure the Fuji one is not. But a must-get accessory, I think, on both sides of the coin there. I will say I tried the Fuji native grip and the small rig grip, and I actually preferred the small rig grip, in case that's helpful. So to reiterate, if you want a light, compact setup, and that's your main consideration, the Fuji X-T5 is the way to go. If you need a joystick for whatever reason, the Fuji X-T5 is the way to go. If you want the best implementation of manual focusing with a photography first flippy screen, X-T5 is the way to go. If you want a full frame experience in a retro body, the ZF is the way to go. If you're going to be shooting in low light environments, like a nightclub or dark places, just shooting at night, the ZF is the way to go. The full frame capabilities with this lower megapixel sensor make this an incredible low light shooter. The Fuji's good to 6400 or 12800. This goes way past that. You might be able to get usable images at 51200. It's pretty incredible in low light, so that for sure that ZF is the way to go. It has a little bit better dynamic range too, because it's full frame, obviously. So that might be a reason you would go for the ZF. If you're in the Fujifilm system, X-T5 is the way to go. This isn't so much better you would switch. If you're in the Nikon system, you've got Nikon lenses and so on, this is a must get. This is a super fun camera, and you'll be glad you have it in your bag and with you all the time. If you're not in either system, that's a trickier proposition, especially if it's your first camera, or your first mirrorless camera at least. If retro styling is important to you, I think either one is fantastic. If you don't mind the APS-C size sensor, the X-T5, I believe, is a little bit cheaper, and the lenses are certainly cheaper, so it's more accessible from that perspective. In terms of pure performance, especially if you want a full frame sensor, this guy is the way to go, the ZF. It's a little bit newer with a newer processor. It's a little bit snappier. The touchscreen implementation is a little bit better. The autofocus is a little bit better. And the image quality is basically on par, except when you get to low light conditions, and then this one pulls ahead. So in terms of all-arounderness, I'd say this guy pulls ahead, and this is your choice. In conclusion, which one did I choose? Well, I didn't choose either one. I'm going to sell them both. I'm going to send the ZF back. I'm going to sell the X-T5. I enjoyed my trip down memory lane trying out these retro cameras, but I realized that for me, I think there's lighter options with better ergonomics and other camera systems. It's sort of a bummer for me on both counts. On the Fujifilm count, I'm leaning towards the GFX 100 the second right now in terms of the medium format camera showdown. I'm still testing them out. That's not a done deal. Another video coming on that. But it would have been great to just stay in one camera system, go deep, really learn their menus, all that kind of a thing. But there's just a few things that didn't have me reaching for the X-T5. Similarly, this guy is just too big and heavy for me. I wanted a film-sized camera that was lighter than a film camera, not much heavier than a Leica camera. This is almost pushing me more towards Leica for my full-frame fix. Even though you get 3 of these for one Leica, I fully understand that. But you know, it's not enough for me to dive into a new camera system just for this camera. It's just not quite there yet. I could see in a few generations, you know, they get this smaller and lighter. They do the Leica trot that happened between the M9 and let's say the M10, you know, forgetting about the M240, you know. And they figure out a way to make a camera that's the same size, exact same size as a film camera, that's lighter than a film camera potentially, you know, with a joystick on the back and a sensor protector, then man, they will have a complete winner on their hands. Even if it's a 26 megapixel sensor. This is actually, or rather, a 24 megapixel sensor. This is an excellent 24 megapixel sensor. And so outside of applications where you would need more megapixels, pretty good all-around sensor, honestly. But yeah, for me, the weight, the ergonomics, the fact that I'm not really in the Nikon system just wasn't, you know, it wasn't enough for me to keep this. This is going back. So Unique Photo in New Jersey will have one of these in stock soon. So, maybe you're wondering, what camera am I going to use for my everyday camera? My sort of light travel setup camera. Well, I'll put up a video about that next week. Like, comment, subscribe. Tell me what you think. Which one would you keep? What did I get wrong? What did I get right? Let me know. What do you think my new camera for my everyday carry situation is going to be? Stay tuned. See you in the next one. Bye.